Welcome to Talk Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. And it's my great pleasure to welcome Nicholas Carretta to the program. Nicholas is president of UltraShipTMS. And today we're going to talk about beating the capacity crisis. Now, capacity is one of those topics that, when I talk to supply chain and transportation professionals, remains top of mind for them, right? When you look at kind of the dynamic transportation environment that we're in, a lot of shippers are looking for ways to be smarter about how they manage capacity and secure capacity in this environment. And, we've had the pleasure of having Nicholas on the program before, and certainly happy to have him back. He's always provided some great insights and advice, based on his perspective on the market. So certainly want to kind of explore this topic with him as well. Before we kind of dive into the conversation, just want to remind those of you that are joining us live today that if you do have a question or a comment for Nicholas, you can do so via the submit a question button or via the chat feature, and I'll keep an eye on that. And certainly, if it's a good and appropriate question, we have time, we'll add that to the conversation. So with that, Nicholas, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for both intros, even though I only heard one.
Well, that's the beauty of doing, live episodes, and it keeps us on our toes and keeps things exciting. And, that's the reason why I have no hair on top of my head. So, Nicholas, it's hard to believe that we're kind of halfway through, 2015 already. Tell us a little bit about what you're seeing or hearing from clients regarding the ongoing transportation challenges, companies are facing today.
Okay. I still hear a good amount, about capacity for different reasons. There's a lot of changes in the transportation market right now. Fuel is down, which is great. I saw some numbers that driver retention was up, but I don't think up far enough to make an impact. A lot of the hours of service changes are still impacting productivity and efficiency. And as such, is still some capacity challenges. So, shippers are still out there trying to find different ways to, service their lanes, service the business, and really address some of the capacity issues. Even if you look not just in the truckload, but intermodal, capacity is definitely constrained quite a bit. Seeing more and more shippers trying to shift over to intermodal to, beat some of this efficiency lack that they've seen in over-the-road transportation. And as such, the intermodal capacity is getting strained. So a lot of what I've heard throughout this year that is, even though, fuel is down and, it should be a really good sign for shippers, they're still struggling to get, the right equipment at the right time and get that consistently. So that's a lot of what I hear.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, it always seems in this industry that, when there's a bit of good news on one end, there's kind of bad news on the other, right? So yeah, fuel is down, which is great. But then you've got, whether it's driver issues or you've got service issues. I know, you brought up intermodal and rail. I know that was, a lot of shippers that kind of looked to intermodal as being kind of a savior, particularly for that long haul, started experiencing some service issues there, some unreliability there. And that created some heartache there as well. So what, in response to, kind of the ups and downs and the different, challenges that keep coming up in the industry, I mean, what are companies doing in response to these challenges? I mean, what are some of the things you're seeing some of your customers or shippers in general, what actions are they taking?
I think most of what I see is people leveraging technology more in different ways. So, one of the things we've talked about in the past, how do you leverage a private fleet better? And that's something, you and I have discussed, getting a single platform, technology platform for integrating your private fleet. How are you leveraging possibly a yard management solution to get more efficiencies on turning the equipment faster and getting efficiencies in the yard so you can, get the carriers on site and off site and maximize their driving time. And then what I've seen also is a sort of resurgence of something we designed almost 10 years ago, which we look as a capacity finder tool or a spot bidding tool where shippers are trying to get more out of their carriers or more capacity or equipment out of their carriers in lanes that they're not really traditionally on or where they're not planning to be on. And it's using the spot bidding tools within their network to tap into capacity. So I think overall the theme is leverage technology in different areas of your supply chain because, technology, if implemented correctly, will create a lot of efficiencies. But specifically, I've seen a lot with this capacity solution that we've put into place, and then other tools like the yard management and the private fleet. It's trying to get creative and be an early adopter of the technology instead of being someone that's lagging behind and playing catch up.
Yeah, and I want to talk about the technology piece in a little bit here, and particularly, I know we talked about this in a previous episode in terms of overcoming the hurdles to implementing technology. So maybe we'll revisit that topic that we talked about. But one of the things that before we get into technology that I hear a lot about and I've written about over the past year, one of the buzz terms today is becoming more carrier friendly, right? What does that mean exactly from your perspective? And maybe are you seeing, what actions do you see some of your customers or shippers taking to be quote unquote more carrier friendly?
Well, I honestly think all of those technologies that we talked about help you be more carrier friendly. So when you look at yard management, I mean, the ultimate benefit of that is turning equipment faster, having better efficiencies at your yard, so that if a carrier is either a live load or a drop trailer carrier, you've got a better communication avenue with that carrier to let them know when they can come in, what the status of their equipment is, and get them moved along more efficiently. When you look at the capacity tool that I talked about, again, that's communicating your needs to your carriers more quickly and efficiently, so that if you're doing it in like a market type of environment where they can place a bid, you can accept that bid, and they know that spot bid is going to be paid and settled with the same efficiency and speed that a contract rate is going to be settled at. That's being more carrier friendly. So, using the technologies and the tools to communicate with the carrier more efficiently, do things like improve efficiencies, turning equipment quicker. There's a lot of different ways where the technology really benefits the carrier, and I think, given two shippers with a similar rate, the carrier is going to choose to do business with the one that can facilitate electronic communications and electronic transfer of information and eliminate manual processes on their end. So, I mean, we've seen that definitely over the years, and implementing technology is very beneficial to the carrier as well as the shipper, and it makes you more carrier friendly.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I think one of the things that I hear kind of rise to the surface when we talk about carrier friendliness is really turning around that asset quickly, right? Helping that carrier come in and come out, right? So detention, and if you keep that carrier waiting, that's probably the worst thing a shipper can do, and certainly with some of the technologies you talked about in terms of, particularly with let's say appointment scheduling or more efficient yard management, those are the things I'm seeing. And I know we've talked about that in the past episodes that are kind of rising to the surface from a technology standpoint, to help along that front. So let's talk about, you kind of raised, some topics there, with regards to, some capabilities with regards to transportation management, software functionality that's kind of important. I guess two-part question. One is, tell us a little bit more about the spot tool and kind of why you're seeing that, again, kind of surface to the top. And then I guess maybe you want to take this one first. We talked about in the past some of the hurdles that companies had to overcome to implement the TMS. Are you seeing those hurdles being lowered as a consequence of the capacity issues and some of these things that we already talked about?
To start with the hurdles, I think, one of the biggest hurdles still remains is that the supply chain, the company supply chain is still competing with internal IT resources. So while it's definitely a hot topic, there's savings, there's additional capacity that you're going to get out of your network, there's efficiencies. You're still competing with other departments of the company for that same IT resource to kind of get up and running. What I think we've started to see is that the integrations have become easier, and there's ways of your implementation timeline starting to shorten. So when we look at any of our tools, the capacity finding tool, the spot bid tool, which is really the same tool, there's ways we can interface and integrate without doing a very long implementation. That's just a file exchange. It's a quick upload, and it's ways of speeding implementation. So some of those hurdles have been overcome by how the technology advances, but still some of them remain as far as getting funding, getting internal resources set aside. Those challenges are still there. What we're seeing, though, more and more is that smaller companies, and I think you touched on this on one of your previous episodes, as they recruit top talent or supply chain professionals that have worked at larger organizations, one of the first things that they want to do is bring in some sort of technology, and these smaller companies are starting to realize the benefits of a TMS application and starting to see more adoption. So some of the barriers are starting to ease, and I think more and more it's not if you're using a TMS, but which TMS are you using or planning on using. You're starting to see a lot more adoption. The barriers still remain, though.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I was going to ask you. I'm glad you brought it up because kind of what you're seeing in kind of the small and mid-sized market. I mean, that seems to be an area that certainly I'm seeing more and more shippers kind of in that market category, kind of be one of two camps. Either one, they're kind of looking for a TMS solution because they've kind of reached that breaking point, or they're in the other camp that say, we don't need a TMS. We're everything's going fine. Is that kind of the two camps that you see that market segment still fall into?
I think the only person that remains in the second camp might be the CFO of some of these companies, but the supply chain people realize they got to be in the first camp, and they know they need a TMS solution. I think what's changing and what we've done is we've kind of, while we brand it and talk about it as a capacity tool, it's really a small module or piece of the larger TMS. So what we can do is we can bring you on board and just use this piece to execute what might be a spot bid, but then when you're ready and your volume starts to build and you want to take advantage of some of the other efficiencies, you can kind of grow up there and you can add modules and add functionality. But I think to your point, I think most people realize that they need a TMS for a lot of reasons. I mean, they're dealing with carriers, and if you're the last one that's still using Excel spreadsheets and screen captures pasted into emails, the carrier's kind of letting you know about it, that the other guy's sending me an EDI tender. I can bill them with an EDI 210 transaction, and you're the last holdout. So if you want access to the better quality carriers, you have to start using the platforms that the big shippers are using. Otherwise, you're going to be left to pull from a pool of carriers that really isn't technology savvy, isn't able to give you accurate status updates because they're not using technology themselves. So,
yeah, I think that goes back to the whole carrier friendly piece of it as well. It kind of ties into that whole framework. So you talked about the spot tool. I mean, some of the things that you mentioned this early on, and certainly, and it's an area that I see some other shippers, particularly those that work with common carrier and private fleet, kind of looking to kind of manage those two processes together in a more, a smarter, more integrated fashion. Are you seeing that as well?
Yeah, that's a big part of what we see. Traditionally, you're using two different platforms. You're treating your private fleet as a carrier, and you're managing it with one platform. Then you have your common carrier on your TMS platform, and it's not managed together. What we have is an integrated platform where you can manage both common carrier and private fleet on the same platform. And then what that gives you the ability to do is really to start using them interchangeably with little effort for last-minute changes, but also to get better metrics on both the fleet, the common carrier. And what you're really able to do is with one platform, compare them side by side, compare costs, compare efficiencies, and then when you're doing scheduling, you're really just scheduling one type of shipment, and it's indifferent whether a common carrier or a private fleet is coming in. It's a very seamless process. So, more and more what we see is people leveraging private fleets to the degree that they can, because they still face some of the driver issues that the common carriers face. But they do have a little bit of an easier time recruiting drivers, because I think for a driver, the preference is to work for the shipper, to work for there's benefits to working for the shipper as far as hours that they can work, routes that they can expect, length of haul, time that they can be home. So being a shipper and deploying a private fleet has a lot of advantages, and we're seeing more and more people do that, especially now that they can kind of manage it and deploy it and benchmark it on one single platform.
Great. No, I see the same thing. I mean, certainly that's one of the trends that I'm seeing out in the marketplace in terms of really, again, shippers really taking a smarter approach and a more integrated approach to how they're managing the different modes, including their own private fleet. We got a question here from Joe Lombardo, so I'm going to go ahead and put it up on the screen and kind of get your thoughts on it. And so his question is, Nick, is there an optimum time frame for a shipper to tender to a truckload carrier? 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours? Does giving a carrier more time help to lock up capacity?
Great question. There's a window that I found through looking at some of the statistics and the data from our TMS, and it really is, a minimum of 24, a maximum of 72 hours. What we found is that if you give them more than 72 hours notice, most carriers are planning their trucks out based on what their average length of haul is, and they know about 3 to 4 days out where the truck is going to be, but they also have to plan for possible delays getting unloaded, things like that. So really they're not planning that far in advance that giving them more than 72 hours notice is a benefit. Anything less than 24 is too short lead time. You're really kind of going into a same-day market. You're assigning an asset that may or may not get unloaded that day. So as carriers have had to shift their strategies for how they deploy their assets based on these changes to the hours of service rules and what counts and what doesn't count toward the driver's logbooks, they've had to really change how they deploy. So if you're giving them less than 24 hours, really too short a lead time to really depend on any kind of reliable service. If you're giving them more than 72, it can be a benefit, but it's probably more than they generally need. So it's really the 24 to 72 hour window is ideal.
Yeah, great question, Joe. And I think related to that, I'll kind of ask a follow-up because I still don't see many shippers doing this. So obviously for, shipments that have to go out tomorrow, 2-3 days from now this week, what we just talked about makes sense. One of the best practices that's been talked about for a while, but I still don't see many shippers doing this, is being able to provide, particularly their more strategic carriers, with longer term forward visibility in terms of how their capacity requirements are changing or might change relative to when they perhaps did the procurement engagement, right? So you do the procurement engagement today based on, what you did last year, based on your forecast and so on and so forth. But we all know that all that changes because you might have a hot product or maybe you lost a customer, so on and so forth. So this concept of providing kind of ongoing longer term visibility to your carriers in terms of your capacity needs so that they can more appropriately prepare or provide you with some solutions, so on and so forth, particularly if you're going to need more capacity than what you had anticipated. What are you seeing there, if anything?
That question is actually the start of quite a large topic as you go forward. The procurement event in general, you're looking to procure capacity for a year or some cases 2 years depending on the shipper. And the overall value of that, I think, it depends on the organization, but you are right. And there's two sides to it. One is like you as a shipper, you're going to try to procure a capacity, and as your seasonal volume changes, for example, how are you letting the carrier know that you're going into a peak season, or how are they planning for that? How are you letting the carrier know if you've increased or doubled your volume with a particular customer or ship point that they're in a lane for? So a lot of that's communication, and are the software tools communicating that right now and giving the carrier visibility into the pipeline? I don't think most of them are. The other thing is from the carrier side. So I said there's two sides to it. As the carrier's adding new customers or losing customers, where their trucks are going to be at any given point changes quite a bit. they may be counting on you for that backhaul to get them to where they had to be, and now they don't have to be back there anymore. And there's different things that are changing in both networks. So when you look at those procurement events, I think they have to be done in a way that doesn't purely consider rate, but considers the overall relationship with the carrier, because as his network changes and your network changes, you need to be going back and forth on a quarterly basis to maybe adjust that and to revisit it. So, part of what you can do with the current TMS tools is look at lanes as new business is changing or business is coming down the pipeline, and, possibly do a regional bid or a bid for a certain set of lanes and be refreshing that quite a bit. So the technology helps now in that it's so much easier to do rate loads. It's so much easier to update and refresh your information. It's not something where someone's got to sit there at the keyboard and type in, 500,000, 2,000, 20,000 lanes. You can do the event, you can upload, and then you can change rates. So I think what you need to be doing is, have some knowledge of what your network looks like, know what the changes are going to be in your network, and be able to communicate that out to the carrier with possibly a small bid or a seasonal bid or something like that to augment your capacity, so you're not stuck, looking for trucks or short and you haven't planned for it. And I think you're right. The technology has to get to the point where it can forecast for the carrier what your needs are, and hopefully you have a good enough relationship with that carrier that they're going to pay attention to that forecast and be, responsive to it.
Yeah, great points on that. And Joe, thank you for your question. We're kind of coming up short on time here, Nicholas. So maybe as kind of have a couple more questions. And you probably shared some of this already, but if you look at a customer or two, kind of a case study or some of the customers that you think are kind of leading the way in implementing some of these best practices and leveraging technology to kind of the maximum potential to manage this capacity. And can you share, you don't necessarily have to name the customers, but can you share some kind of examples of kind of how customers are managing this?
Yeah, I think, what you'll see is, we have some case studies that we've published. There are a couple different situations that we'll run into. One is the smaller customer that's looking to use a capacity tool to get started and maybe build up to a larger scale TMS. So their volume is, say, lower volume, under 50,000 shipments, maybe 15 to 20,000 shipments a year. They want to implement a capacity tool, and what they can do is load up their carrier base, and then as the shipments come available, they can put them out in a sort of bid status to all the carriers, all the different modes, air, ground, LTL, truckload. Another one you may see is a customer that has an outbound solution, but they're looking to do an inbound solution. And we have one, fairly large protein shipper. They're putting loads on every day to manage their inbound because they have an outbound solution, but the inbound kind of remained outside of scope. So this is a way of them getting that volume covered in a more efficient manner, and they've had some fantastic success. And then you'll see even large shippers that have an existing tool, but they don't have the bidding capability within it. They're not able to put shipments out or loads out for bid, and they're going to augment their existing technology. We've seen that, and we've seen people that are looking to control like expedite shipments, for example. I had one case study. There was over $50,000 in savings just in the first month by using the capacity tool to solicit bids from their carriers and then decide if they needed to really expedite the shipment or not, and if they could make it within the time frame by maybe a cheaper mode of transportation, but still make delivery requirements. So those are 4 different, examples of how it's used, and there's case studies to, support those. And it's definitely been successful over the last 10 years. We've done this quite a bit.
Yeah, those are great examples. The other thing that you hear a lot of, but I don't think you see many companies actually take much action on, although little by little you do see more and more examples out there, is obviously collaboration, right? Or co-shipping, as another way to manage capacity more effectively, right? Are you seeing, again, any of your customers doing that? Are you seeing more customers interested in that? What's your thought on that?
It remains something of interest. As you know, like some of the larger shippers have kind of have banded together to make a consortium for buying transportation and leveraging a larger spend. You see that quite a bit. I think it still remains elusive for a smaller shipper, and I think also it tends to be a little bit elusive even for private fleets. You would think you have all that capacity coming back empty, and get some freight on it, fill up some of those empty miles. But what I found to be the difficult aspect of that is the collaboration and the scheduling, because while the asset is available, if it doesn't free up as planned, you're losing that outbound capacity, and you're losing the true benefit of the private fleet, which is being able to respond to the customer and deliver to your customer on time more efficiently. So I think, as you go forward, the platforms need to be more collaborative to continue to have benefit. And I think that there's a lot of ways where that collaboration can be seen, both on, several shippers sharing a platform or sharing data over a platform to better leverage their spend, or for private fleets to be leveraging their empty capacity coming back and to put some extra revenue on that to offset the premium that you'd pay for a private fleet.
Yeah, no, good points. We've got time maybe for a couple of more questions. So another one came in from Joe, so I'll ask his question first, and then I'll ask my final one. This one's kind of going back to kind of the overall state of the transportation industry, and perhaps some actions that can be taken to mitigate that. And so his question is just your opinion on something I know that's being talked about in the industry on lowering the Class 8 driving age from 21 to, let's say, 18 or 19. So your thoughts on that?
I smirk because so much has been done to reduce the driver capacity that can be undone or could be changed to not have to do that. I think I was exposed to the trucks and to those things at an early age. From my father had a trucking company, and until you're really around them and you've earned the respect for them, I don't know. I don't know if I would go for that. I think there's other things that can be done to draw more people into the industry, to tap other resources. And, while it would seem good at the time, I don't know how. I'd have to have more facts on that to be able to answer it. Initially, I'd say no. Do some of the other things to get more efficiency out of the drivers, to give them the ability to earn more money through additional productivity, not just by raising rates of pay. But there are a lot of things that you can do within your network. There was an interesting article in the Wall Street Journal Logistics Report today about one of the food distribution companies, how they've lowered the package weight that they let the people handle in the warehouse from 65 to like 28 pounds or something along those lines. And it allowed them to bring in people that could, lift a lighter load and that were typically excluded from doing that job. And they've increased productivity just by changing something that they wanted to put technology in, but the cost of that technology was significant to automate package handling. And there's other ways to do it. So I think if you look at the job and you look at things like driver unloading and packaging of your product that could make your product palletized versus floor loaded, maybe there's more efficiencies to be had there for moving the driver and making the job more driver friendly.
Yeah, great insight. I knew this was a kind of a question near and dear to your heart based on your family history there. And the bottom line is there's really no easy answer to these types of questions, right? I think on paper they all kind of say they make sense, right? Oh yes, sure, that'll increase the pool. Same thing as paying drivers more, and other things. And I think, really, at the end of the day, it's really kind of looking at it from a big picture standpoint and looking at all these things, and the pros and cons, and really prioritizing which are the ones that are going to have the biggest impact overall, and that's going to benefit the industry. Joe, thank you so much for your question. So, we're kind of short on time here, so I'm just going to go to my last question, just kind of as a way to wrap up. I mean, what advice or recommendations would you give to shippers that are looking to kind of manage their capacity in a more intelligent manner?
I'll keep my answer short, and I'll say be an early adopter. Don't be the last one to get on the technology bandwagon. Start to realize that you can implement the technology, you can do it right, you can see the benefits, and be one of the people out there that's an early adopter. Don't be one of these people that call me up and say, well, we still don't have any in-cab communication, and we're still using cell phones and things like that. Get on the bandwagon now and start taking advantage of the technology.
I agree. I mean, I think those companies that as I term, continue to be companies of yesterday are going to continue to fall further and further behind the competition, and there really is no excuse today, because when you look at the diversity of technology options out there, deployment options, and the price points, so on and so forth, those hurdles that we've talked about historically, they were certainly much larger, years ago than they are today, and certainly there is an easier path forward for many companies out there. So Nicholas, like I always say at the end of all my programs, you always manage to scratch the surface on these topics, but I think we've got a great conversation started here. So thank you very much for taking the time and coming back on the program.
Great. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the questions. Much appreciated.
And I want to thank all of you who joined us live today. And Joe Lombardo, thank you for your questions and participating in the conversation. If you are watching this episode on demand and you've got a question or a comment for Nicholas, you can post your question or comment there at talkinglogistics.com. And I'm sure Nicholas will be more than happy to respond via that medium. So with that, again, thank you all for joining us today, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.